What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the show. And this right here is a brand new 2025 DRZ4SM. And I figured since there are so many questions swirling around about this bike, I might as well just make a video answering as many of your questions as humanly possible. So I put out the call on Discord and on YouTube, and we're gonna go through as many as I can in about 15 or 20 minutes. Now, before we dive in, I gotta remind you that this right here is currently my DRZ, but it will soon be one of yours because I'm actually giving this thing away with fan of them. That's right, you could skip the entire buying process of, let's face it, what is kind of an overpriced motorcycle by getting entered to win down in the comments below. Hey guys, real quick before we dive into today's video, I do want to let you know that Cardo is running a Labor Day flash sale on all of their units, excluding the Spirit line. You can get 22% off by clicking the link down in the description below and using the code SPITE10 for 10% off. I've actually been out riding around with my wife this last week down here in South Texas. That's actually Mexico over there. And I've been using this thing all week, and it would have been a much more boring road trip if I didn't have this on my helmet. So kind of serendipitous. But yeah, if you wanted to save some money, click that link down in the description below. Again, SPITE10 will get you 22% off. Now, let's go dive into the video. And with that, let's dive in with the first question from Discord from Full Metal Corgi. Do you feel a disconnect to the soul of the bike with the ride-by-wire? It's weird, right? Because this motorcycle, even though it has rider modes and all that stuff, it's still got a cable throttle. So it doesn't feel like it has that film necessarily between you and the bike. I think a lot of that on modern motorcycles actually comes down to rider modes. It's less the ride-by-wire feeling like it's not direct between you and the throttle bodies and the rear wheel and the motor. It's more like everything that you do, every input you do is processed through the rider mode. Honestly, with it in the A mode, you'd never really know that it wasn't a cable throttle. It feels completely normal to me. Honestly, it feels a little bit more connected to the old bike, given that this is the same part off the old bike. It's literally the exact same throttle housing and U-shaped bend. I bet you it's the exact same part number too. Dad Bike Simp, how does it compare to the Cowie KLX300SM and the KTM 390 smc-r? And if it's better than those two, is it better enough to justify charging 50% more? Well, I haven't ridden either of those bikes, but I can tell you that the KTM 390 motor is a lot of fun. It is a great little motor, and it is a slightly heavier motorcycle. I'd say it's basically in the exact same weight class as this thing. So for having a little bit more power and a little bit more of that KTM soul to it, I think the 390 is probably the way to go. Probably. The KLX300SM is riding the back of the short bus. I'm sorry. I rode a 300SM a while back, and it was the most anemic feeling supermoto, even with 6 gears in the box. It's not even in the same category as these two. Now, we do got to talk about that price. Is this thing significantly better? Like you said, 50% better? No. I think that's really just the biggest sticking point with this bike is the price, because the bike itself is phenomenal, but it ain't $9,000 plus $600 plus dealer fees and tax awesome. Orange. Why didn't Suzuki add a 6th gear? Are they stupid? I mean, I don't know, man. I don't know. This feels like a stopgap. Honestly, if anything, this feels like they made this bike because they had to, and the real bike is coming out in like a couple of years. I hope it is anyway. Muff Pot, smc-r. No. But the real question, is the EFI 2025 DRZ a bigger or smaller improvement over the previous Carburetion version, than the Gen 3 KLR over the Gen 2 KLR? Oh, okay, I know what you're saying. Is this bike a bigger improvement over the previous gen than the KLR 650 was when it got EFI? Because really all the KLR 650 did to go from Gen 2 to Gen 3 was add EFI. That's it. You still had to do the doohickey. You still had to do the thermo bob. All of the community mods out there, you still had to do them and they still fit. And honestly, that's really all KLR 650 riders were asking for. They just wanted a little bit of fuel injection so that their bike ran better, but it's, you know, it could have benefited from a 6th gear. Honestly, it feels like Suzuki could have learned from some of the mistakes there, and in some ways they did. It feels like the old DRZ, you kind of had to do a lot to it. You had to do the 3x3, you had to jet it, you had to put an exhaust on it to really get it to wake up. This thing has a really nice punch right out of the box. I do like the suspension on this thing better than the 2005 era suspension that the old bike was rocking. Don't get me wrong, that was not bad suspension. This is just better. I do think that the brake feels better on this, despite having rubber hoses from the factory on a $10,000 motorcycle, but you know, we'll talk about that in the review. And I think that this is a better way to modernize the look of the bike. The new Gen 3 KLR is not a great looking bike. As somebody who owned one, it looked a lot like a Kawasaki. This thing just looks nice. I really like the way this looks. I've been looking at this for 2 months now, and it's a great looking bike. Honestly, it looks as good to me as a 690. Okay, Corgi, I'll humor your second question. How does it compare to the Hayabusa?
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
But honestly, there's a lot in here that makes me think of the Gen 3 Hayabusa, where it was just sort of them painting by numbers. There's a lot of Suzuki painting by numbers here. So even though you got a sarcastic, silly question in there, boom, I gave you a real answer. Now, moving on over to YouTube, we've got Vanity 7K. How does it compare to the SMC-r? Completely different world, man. The SMC-r is frankly insane that bike even exists. It's a 75-ish horsepower, 55-ish foot-pounds of torque while weighing 30 pounds more than this thing does. And it has 6 gears, and it has all the technology. Honestly, it feels like this bike wanted to be an SMC-r. With the inclusion of the technology on here, with the modernization, with the way that it looks, it definitely feels like they tried to do something that could punch with the SMC-r. It's just, it can't keep up. There's no way to say it any nicer than that. The SMC-r, the 698 mono, those are in completely different categories. This thing, is it the king of the middleweight, I guess, because you could consider like a 250, the middleweight supermotos? I don't know, man. That KTM, the one that's made in India, the SMC-r 390, tough, it's tough. One-Eyed Rover doesn't really ask a question, but he's got something good and I want to talk about it anyway. Since it has no tach and no 6th gear, you should put an aftermarket tachometer on it to show what RPM it cruises at. I test rode one and thought it was still pretty good at highway speed, like not too buzzy or out of breath. You're right, it's not too buzzy, it's not out of breath, and honestly, that's one of the things that feels like they've truly modernized this motorcycle. One of those points where the old KLR, it still just rattled like crazy. It was a very buzzy and vibey motorcycle because they barely touched anything. Suzuki has improved this motorcycle, and in a lot of ways, this is a more pleasant street bike. However, on a Texas highway, it does get a little out of breath north of 75 miles an hour. That's where having a 6th gear would really, really come in handy. If you're in like a state where you get a lot of people pulled over for speeding and you got low speeds, this is probably gonna be great, honestly. It's a solid bike, and you put a more comfortable seat on there, really great for a tall rider for a long ride. Leroy Brangle asks, how well does the headlight work? Is it bright enough to get home after dark? Yes, it is a great headlight, honestly. I have not had any issues with this thing. I live just outside of the city. There are some street lights. There are some spots that don't have great street lights, and this thing is surprising with how good it is. I honestly was expecting it to kind of suck, and it doesn't. You know what time it is, 17:35. Is it meaningfully different than a DRZ with Electron carburetor? The reason why, for those of you who don't know, he's referencing the Electron carb is because that's a carburetor that is supposed to correct for altitude to a certain extent. I used to have a DRZ with Electron carburetor, and I wanted to headbutt a coat hook every time I took it out. It was terrible. Even though it was set up for the bike, it never ran right. And honestly, I've heard a bunch of people just say, get the FCR and then deal with jetting, or get 2 FCRs. The Electron is, I've been told that the Electron is not the greatest option. And that's not just by people on the internet, that's by people who, like, carbs are their whole life. So in that sense, infinitely better. I actually took my DRZ, my 400SM, to get on ADV Fest, which is 4,000-ish feet higher, and my carburetor was not happy. So this thing, I would not have had that problem with. Kitchen Bratlin, how is it for longer rides? You have done an iron butt on a KLR. How long of a ride would you want to do on this one? Yes, I did do an iron butt on the KLR, and it sucked. Oh, it sucked. The seat was okay. The seat was okay. Doing an iron butt on this would be like doing an iron butt on a sawhorse, man. It would not be fun. You absolutely have to get a different seat for this if you're gonna be riding it long time. Something like a Seat Concepts would be an easy bolt-on, but I will say this is smoother. It's a lot smoother than the KLR 650 was, and where it's dumping the wind, it's so much lower. I probably would have been more comfortable on this, despite the fact that it does get a little wibbly wobbly at highway speed, assuming I put a different seat on there. Do a cool supermoto build on it, ? From Your Dog Water. You Are Dog Water, okay. Honestly, man, there's not really a lot out for that. And this is one of the problems with this bike, I'd say. You can't tear it down the way you can an old DRZ. That bike has 20 years worth of aftermarket. This thing has not even one. You have to deal with electronic tuning versus taking it to a carb guy. So do I expect to see the massive growth in the aftermarket that the old DRZ had? Probably not. Wizard X666, can it run Doom? Nah, I don't even think it can run Hangman. Raymond Atho. I'm interested in supermotos, but I'm 5'7". Any way to make this bike work for me? Go sit on it, dude. Seriously, go sit on it. You'd be surprised how good the reach to the ground is on this. It feels shorter than a lot of the other supermotos I've sat on. So if you can be comfortable putting 1 foot down, you'll be able to make this work. And it's so much better than the KLX300SM. Go sit on it, seriously. Here's a good question from Michael Miller. Why an SM versus a dual sport? It depends, right? So for most people, I would assume the goal with owning a bike like this is so that you could own a street bike and then put dirt rims on it and take it off-road. That is how I look at this bike. And I would prefer, because of the situation in which I live, where I'm dealing with Texas land usage, which is like 0, it's all private, so I don't get to ride off-road all that much, I would prefer to start with the SM because I'd have a lot more fun riding this on the street than the dual sport, and then I can save up, get myself the dual sport rims and put it on there when I want to go on a trip. So that's why I would recommend the SM over the S. It is worth noting, one of the cool things on here, the forks are, as far as I know, on the exterior the exact same, and the hubs are the exact same. So you can just take the other wheels and plonk them right on this bike. You don't even have to do any of the fiddling that you had to do on the old DRZ, which that's awesome. Carb Cube, bike's ugly AF. It's in the eye of the beholder. I think it looks good. Now, there are so many questions to deal with this and the old DRZ, to deal with this and price. So I'm gonna just try and grab a couple of them and we'll talk about it. But there's so many questions about it, and I understand. It's probably the biggest question mark about this motorcycle. Dasco asks, is this now so loaded with technology that the KLX300SM is the truer successor to the original DRZ4SM? No, honestly. I do think that this is, if it's not the successor, it's like if somebody passed the DRZ through a modern cloning software, And it was just like, all right, this is what you get. This is like the slightly more evolved version. The fuel injection is nice. The suspension upgrade is nice. I do think that if you were to put these two bikes side by side, and I actually have Jake the Garden Snake coming up tomorrow, and we're gonna film old DRZ versus new DRZ with one of the internet's biggest DRZ experts. We're gonna see if this is in fact a better bike than my built DRZ, which has a big bore kit, has a full exhaust, has all this stuff on it. Out of the box, I think this is a way better bike than the old DRZ was. I truly do. Then we come into all of the questions about price, man, and I get it. This bike is $8,999 with a $600 destination fee, and then dealer fees and assembly and all of this other stuff, registration. It just does not justify that price tag. I'm sorry, it doesn't. Suzuki, what you doing, dude? We are gonna get into all of this a little bit more in the full review, so stay tuned for that because there is a lot to love on this bike. And I really do think that if Suzuki were to address the price on this, the bike would be worth it. So if you wanna learn more about all of that, stay tuned for the full review. And don't forget, you can get entered to win this bike by clicking down in the description below, checking out fanofthem.com/spite, where you can get yourself entered to win. There's a few weeks left, I think, by the time this is coming out. And you're not gonna wanna miss it because it really is the cheapest way to get into a DRZ. You can even get in for free. So if that sounds good to you, click the link down in the description below, get yourself entered to win, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. See you later.